Okay, welcome everybody. This is Over the Lines. This is episode one. I'm Arton James, author of the upcoming football novel Foul, which comes out this Friday. I am kindly joined today by Matt Walker, football globetrotter, I think you wouldn't mind me calling you,
No, not at
and
all.
author of Europe United, which has been out, what, around a year, is it?
Yeah, just under a year. Came out early August last year.
Okay, fantastic. So, I've just read the book. I've got the book here. Lovely
Oh,
cover, photographed by Matt. He's also got the book.
Snap.
We're playing Snap. So obviously I know what the book's about, but just tell everyone at home what it is that you did.
Yeah, so it was my ambition to watch a top division football match in all of the 55 UEFA nations in one season. That's the 2017-18 season. And the book is really a documentation of my exciting challenge. So it combines a lot of football, a lot of travel, and quite a bit of challenge as well, trying to get around those 55 countries in just under 11 months.
Yeah, it was quite some undertaking, and 11 months was a hell of a way to do it. You ended up doing more than what you'd set out to do as well.
Yeah, I had a little bit of contingency at the end of my time watching football, and I think I finished my 55 nations with about 3 weeks to spare. So that was quite pleasing.
55 nations. I mean, most people won't travel to 55 nations in a lifetime, and you managed to do it
No, you're right.
in 11 months. I noticed there were some mentions in the book about, like, it seemed like you'd done quite a lot of travel to football beforehand.
Yeah, that's right. I've always been into travel. I've always loved football, and I'm quite happy to do the two on their own. But I've gone to the Africa Cup of Nations a couple of times, once in Ghana, and then last year in Egypt, 3 World Cups, and that kind of really did mix the two together. And yeah, it kind of fueled my ambition to do something really different and combine my two passions.
Do you remember your first away day? I mean, abroad away day.
Yeah, I think no, the first abroad away day. I think it gets referenced in the book actually very early on. It was when I took some time out after university and spent 8 months traveling around the world. And I think I only caught two games, and they were both in Malaysia. And they would be the first games that I saw, saw outside the UK. And indeed, yeah, I've gone back to watch other games in Asia since. So it's a place that I enjoy visiting.
Where else in Asia have you been to see football?
To see football, I've seen football in Iran when I was traveling there. I've also seen football in Indonesia. That was more recently. And yeah, I think I would like to see a few other. There's a few other countries which were maybes, but I wasn't able to actually see the games. But of course, seeing the whole of the Asian leagues in one year would be an even bigger undertaking than going around the 55 UEFA nations.
How many nations in Asia?
It's in the mid 40s, so it's less than the 55 in Europe, but it does include Australia, who play in the Asian Confederation, and also quite a few war-torn states. Yeah, Syria are in there, and I think Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, North Korea. So
Wow.
yeah, there's a few places there where it might be quite awkward to get into the country, let alone watch a football match.
Yeah,
But
just a little bit.
yeah, but then there are a lot of countries where it will be very straightforward. The Southeast Asian countries, they love their football. It's really big in Thailand and Vietnam. And you've got places like Hong Kong, China, Japan, who've got very well-established leagues, Korea as well. So I think from a travel football perspective, it would be a fantastic undertaking.
I can see that you've given it quite a lot of thought already. Yeah. So how did the idea come about to do this?
So I love football and travel, but it's not my day job. I'm a statistician working in the government, but I realised I need a bit of a break away from my career. I've been working in the government for around about 2 decades, and I was just trying to find the niche that meant that I could do something that was really different. As you implied, I've already travelled a lot, so just sort of taking a career break and travelling wouldn't have been a challenge enough for me. So I came up with the idea when I was actually, a little bit bored at Christmas. When you got those endless days, without very much to do, just sort of eating and drinking. And I was thinking about how I could frame my break away from the office. And then I thought about the 55 UEFA nations, and thinking, that's a reasonable challenge. It's a lot of countries to get through, but it's not like paddling backwards up the Amazon or anything. It's not going to be sort of a physically too demanding, but a lot of logistics thrown in. And I thought about some of the places it would cover, and obviously some very westernized countries that I'm quite familiar with, like France and Germany and Spain. But then it would take me to places that I always wanted to go to, like the Caucasus regions, Albania, to Belarus, to Kazakhstan, and it seemed to be the perfect combination of places that I'd already been, but would go for football, and then places that I'd love to visit, and then football would be a great thing to do alongside it.
And how long did it take to plan? Because it's no small undertaking.
Yeah, I guess the fact that there's about a dozen summer leagues first, they're the teams that play between sort of February, March through to the early autumn, and then 40-something autumn leagues, meant that I had to focus my planning first of all on those summer leagues, because to cover the 17-18 season, the 17 summer is basically the 17-18 season for those countries. So I really had to cover them by the autumn. So I had to focus my plans on those, and also because they were the earliest, the fixtures came out before all of the other autumn leagues. Autumn leagues, you couldn't do anything until the fixtures came out generally around about July, August time. So yeah, I could be very focused on the first dozen countries, which were perhaps the most challenging because I had a very sort of narrow limit in when I could visit. The plan was only to try and sort of plan maybe 3 months in advance. You couldn't say, well, I want to go to this game in March because it could get moved for television or all sorts of things. And also, I'm very good at researching different countries, but as it was, I was researching about a dozen countries every day. You can't research 55 countries in a day. So yeah, I think in total, the planning, I think I kicked off around about January before starting the challenge in June, and then it kind of continued throughout the whole journey.
Yeah, as you say, the fixtures rejigging and I guess travel cancellations and stuff like that must have made you have to keep on your toes.
Yeah, exactly. Quite a few games got moved for various reasons. Match fixing, I think that was Latvia. A few games got moved for European commitments. Television was an obvious one. Didn't have any sort of political instability, which would have been one of the issues. Unfortunately, no pandemic, which would have curtailed the whole project, of course. But yeah, you always had to be checking the fixtures on a regular basis. You couldn't just put in your plan, I'm going to go to Romania on Sunday and go to this game. As it turns out, actually, the game I was planning for many weeks to go and see in Romania, I couldn't go to because it got moved from a Sunday to a Monday. But that was, that was part of the flexibility of the trip.
Mm-hmm. And when you first started planning, was it 55 nations? Because I can't remember from the beginning of the book, around the time that you were thinking of this. Go on.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Kosovo became the 55th nation as I was doing some of the preliminary planning. So it was before I'd actually undertaken the very beginning of the trip. And there was some talk about, you might remember, Jersey becoming a UEFA nation as well. So I
don't think I got that.
It did get turned down by UEFA, and they lost their appeal as well. I was quite relieved because I didn't really want to go to Jersey at the very end of my trip. That would have been an expensive trip, and it would have ruined the 55 branding as well. It would have been 56 UEFA nations.
That's true. You could just kind of marker it in. You'd been all right.
Well, it's a bit like Euro 2020, isn't it? They're going to have to put a +1 at the end, some 55 +1 UEFA nation.
Like an old Zamorano shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Jersey, do you know anything about the football infrastructure over there?
Well, it's quite limited. I think Jersey have tried to make it into non-league non-league the non-league system, but have struggled because for them to enter the non-league system in England, they would have to pay for the airfares and the accommodation for all of the travelling support or travelling teams. So I'm not sure if they've quite made it into the non-league system, but I think it was a bit after Gibraltar got in that UEFA started to tighten up some of their regulations, because otherwise you could have every sort of semi-autonomous island state wanting to be part of competition, and it does raise the quality of football in these countries. And this is something I saw certainly in Gibraltar and in Kosovo, who are on the verge of qualifying for the Euros. But you have to draw the line, and you can't have the Isle of Man and Guernsey and Jersey all trying to get into European competition.
Yeah. So where did you start your travels?
So the very first country was Georgia. I was very excited because it was my first country, and it was a country I also really wanted to visit. And I ended up visiting 4 times on my trip. I had to use Georgia as a bridge kind of between Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey as well, because land travel between those countries wasn't permitted. So I spent 3 days in Georgia. I actually had to sort of change that to my very first country. It was due to be later in the trip after they indeed changed their season to a summer season as well.
So, I mean, I've read the book and I've got a feeling of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. So, I remember a few months ago watching, have you seen any of those Ramesh Ranganathan travel shows?
I've seen virtual all of them, I think. Yeah, they're very entertaining.
Yeah. So, like, especially with the smaller nations, it had a little bit of a feeling of that. You're getting a snapshot into these countries that you usually wouldn't. So, like, what countries kind of surprised you most with their character? Not so much like I'm not really looking for whether they exceeded expectations or didn't meet expectations, but just were different from how you thought they would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a tricky one because I've travelled a lot, so there wasn't really that many places that really surprised me when I got there. But possibly Kazakhstan was the one where I didn't really know what it was going to be like as a country, and it's a real mishmash of influences, and you can read lots of books about countries, but until you actually visit them, you don't really kind of see how those influences work in real life. And because of Kazakhstan's location, it's got influences from China, but because of its oil money, it's got influences from the Middle East. And then of course you've got the sort of the Russian vein running through it as well. So yeah, I think Kazakhstan was very very, very different. And the bustle of the market in Almaty, which is the biggest city in the south of the country, was very different from the kind of almost Dubai-esque architecture that you see in what was called Astana. It's changed its name recently, the capital.
You've held on to a lot of the knowledge of these places, even just having a conversation like this. Like, it must have been a good while, well, getting on 2 years ago that you first went out there. You seem to have retained a lot, which is super impressive. I mean, I was very impressed in the book. I know you mentioned that you took quite extensive notes on your travels to keep up with everything.
Yeah, you have to really. I mean, if you're trying to do any sort of travel log, any sort of football writing, you can't rely on your memory. So my notebook, and I've got you can imagine a couple of shoe boxes full of them. Was my best friend really, because you can try and fiddle around with your phone, but nothing really beats scribbling something down on a bit of paper, particularly when you're at a football match or traveling around. But yeah, I think people have better memories for some things than others. I don't think anybody's got an immaculate memory, but my memory is very good for travel places. I can almost sort of remember how to get to a restaurant I went to in Belize 14 years ago, just because I can picture how the town was put out, even though I've only been there for a couple of days. So yeah, I did retain a lot of memory. I mean, I started the trip, it was over 3 years ago when I started the trip actually. So
wow.
So yeah, it's beginning to get quite quite a reasonable amount of time. But actually, a lot of the publicity I'm doing around the book, both during my travels and afterwards, has sort of meant that I've kept remembering things, kept digging up old photographs, and it's been great to sort of relive the journey, so to speak.
Yeah, properly crystallize those memories so they
Yeah,
stay
exactly.
with you. No, it's like I'm still kind of overwhelmed by how how much you did. I think in my lifetime I've been to 2 or 3 matches abroad. So to do what you did, I'm still processing it, really. And you did it. So
yeah, I think it doesn't really come through in the book because you can imagine trying to compress 55 countries into one narrative of 468 pages was quite some feat. There was masses that didn't make the book. I think one review said it could have been the longest football book in history and probably would have been warranted. So yeah, a lot of stuff didn't make it. But one thing that didn't really come through, because it would have been a little bit tedious to hear about it, but it was really quite tiring. I was charging from 5 a.m. flights straight onto a bus to hiring a car the next day, and sort of throwing myself from one country to the next to get around the 55 countries in such a short time frame. I think it was in Turkey and Armenia. I was traveling sort of 3 days in a row, pretty much non-stop, to get from one place to the next. But obviously, I couldn't translate that into the book because reading about bus journeys for 3 days isn't going to be an interesting read.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was very, very tiring, and I had to have a couple of breaks. One, major breaks at home. One in August and one in December, and that was critical because it was kind of like about a third and 2/3 of the way through the trip. So I was able to, really get a bit of rest done and do a lot more planning. It was quite hard to plan on the road because you want to take stuff in, not plan other countries.
Yeah, I mean, it leads me on to a question that I've thought about was how did you entertain yourself during all the traveling, or was it a case of just making notes and sleeping?
Yeah, I'm not very good at sleeping when traveling, actually, so I didn't do a lot of that. I think it's a combination because you've always got to be on the lookout for a potential story. And you've read the book, and you can see some of the people I met on trains and buses actually became, great parts of the story. I think of, Eric in Kazakhstan, who I met on a train, and if I'd been just, listening to music and writing out my notes, I would never have met him. So
Yeah.
you kind of had to be open to meeting other people, but then again, of course, sometimes there was a necessity to write up the match report from the previous day because otherwise you would forget what had happened. So yeah, it was a bit of a balance. As for watching, I think I started off trying to watch downloaded films, etc., on flights, but I soon realised I had so much to do that was that wasn't going to be possible.
Mm-hmm.
But there were quite a few days when I was able to just relax and be kind of like a normal tourist. I wouldn't even do anything towards the book or towards my travels. I would just sort of wander around an old town centre, and they were quite nice as well.
So when you first set out to do it, am I right in thinking you didn't have a book deal in place when you went out there, but was that one of the things that you were potentially looking for, or did the opportunity just arise?
Yes, it's a good question. I've been asked it a few times, actually, particularly at work. But yeah, it was one of my intentions to get a book deal, but I would have self-published if that wasn't possible, because I really wanted to record what I was experiencing. I sort of made the joke that this is the Samuel Pepys of European football. It's that's kind of snapshot, being able to see all of the leagues in one year, and who knows if that will necessarily be possible in future years. So that's why I was able to, I took a lot of photographs. I'm a big photographer, so I took about 10,000 photos on the trip, and I kept, sort of notes throughout. So it was always my intention. I actually got the book deal about halfway through the trip, so that was good because it gave me a bit of extra confidence, a little bit of extra money, and meant that I had, an even bigger thing to work towards because I knew I had a published book coming out.
Yeah. No, that must have really spurred you on. Had you done any writing before?
I've done sort of travel blogs, like one of which got published on the Fulham FC website. My team, when I was at the Brazil World Cup, it just kind of got picked up when I was out there, and they featured it on the Fulham website. I've done a few articles for magazines, but nothing really major. Certainly nothing that's 123,000 words.
Mm-hmm. Is
And
that what it
I
totaled
think that's
to? Yeah.
I think that's part. I mean, writing a 1,000 word article, I find that reasonably easy if you've got sort of an angle and something interesting to write about. But I think trying to translate 55 countries into a book was a lot harder by many multiples.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, I've written something that's not as long as this, and it's an endurance task. This
Yeah, it ended up being longer than the publishers expected, but I think it was just simply by having 55 countries, it was going to always be a relatively lengthy football book.
Mm-hmm.
I
So
didn't get paid by the word, unfortunately. I should have got that in the contract.
maybe next time. Maybe next time.
Maybe next time, yeah.
So the people that you met on your travels, I mean, you managed to get like into a lot of clubs, dealing with press officers and sometimes like management and directors and all sorts. Tell us a little bit about how it was to be kind of embraced by the actual clubs themselves.
Yeah, that was really it was really surprising. It kind of started in Iceland when I got given a season ticket for the rest of the season, which had only just kicked off in Iceland when I visited for the club. One of the two clubs I visited there, Starnan, and got a lovely behind the scenes tour. And I think it was particularly the small to medium sized countries. They really embraced the trip, particularly when it started to get a bit of publicity. I think they could see it both ways. That they would get publicity for their club, and I would get some stories. I think sometimes I didn't get responses from clubs, and I think that was probably good for the both the freshness of my experiences and the freshness of the book. I think it would have been a bit dull if I was watching all of the games from the exec box, but it was quite nice to have a couple of those experiences, and then you could really sort of compare them to when you've been on the terrace behind the goal with all the ultras.
Where were you speak about ultras? How many of them? Well, not in terms of numbers, but like, did you encounter many on your travels, and what were the kind of most memorable of them?
Well, there were a few altercations between fan groups, which you kind of expect to see, particularly when you go to so many games in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. Because I tried to avoid the bigger clubs, I didn't really see the sort of the ultra culture with like tens of thousands of people supporting their club. But in some ways, it was nicer visiting the small to medium sized clubs where people got behind their team, but it wasn't quite so in your face as you find in some countries.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's worth saying. I mean, the average attendance of the games I went to was about just a couple of thousand. So it gives you indication that sometimes it was really quite a small group. Probably what you get at a decent non-league match in England, for instance. But that didn't detract from the experience. I think sometimes that's when you really get to meet people, because there's just a few thousand at the game, as opposed to Borussia Mönchengladbach, which is the biggest club I went to see, the biggest crowd I went to see, where you're just another number, really.
Yeah, it's it did strike me. I mean, you talk about the size of the crowds there. I think most people have such a anglicized view of football. We're used to Premier League, we're used to tens of thousands, and outside of that, maybe some Bundesliga, Serie A. The top 5 leagues tend to occupy most people's attention. So when you are talking about attendances where there were hundreds at a top league game, that in itself paints a picture that you don't often see.
Yeah, it's worth talking about, populations as well. I mean, we live in a country which is, sort of 65 million people. I live in London, which is 9 million people. I think if London was a country, it would be, sort of somewhere around about 20th, I think, in that list of by population.
Yeah.
So I think we sometimes can be a bit disdainful of small crowds, but we kind of forget that some of these countries aren't very big. And also, a lot of the countries are not very wealthy, and they don't have disposable income to spend necessarily on match tickets and going to the games.
Well, yeah, that was going to bring me to the point about tickets. I was staggered when you mentioned some of the prices for games. I'm an Arsenal fan, so I know. If I want
very
to stump
expensive
up,
place to watch football.
oof, I think are we still the most expensive in the country or the world or something like? The
It's
prices
quite
are
hard because you get loads of you get European and cup games thrown in as well, don't you? So it's kind of it's quite difficult to compare. But yeah, you certainly are still one of the most expensive.
Yeah, we haven't had the top tier European ones for a few years now.
No, you might not have any next year.
Maybe not. I'm hoping so, but the turn in form might have came a little too late. The front end of the season was pretty rough for us.
Mm.
But give us an idea of like the range of ticket prices that you encountered on your travels.
Well, there was a number that were free to get in. So, I mean, places, particularly the small leagues like San Marino and Andorra, no entrance charge there.
So how does that work? Like how do they run the club?
So, the model's very different than it would be for, say, a non-league team in England. The reason I make that comparison is that's probably about the same level of football, but they will receive a lot of money from UEFA, both straight to the Football Federation and also for teams that participate in European competition. Just a couple of rounds in the Europa League or the Champions League qualifiers would probably pay for most of their salaries for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And then the sponsorship comes into play as well, because a lot of these teams might be quite small, but they are representing, in some cases, the country. And they will get probably more favourable sponsorship deals than they would have done if they were in a bigger country where they were just a small regional team. There were quite a few that were free. I think the cheapest ticket I saw anything was 12 pence for a child to get in Kazakhstan. That's nominal. I mean, whatsoever. And then the other end of the scale, well, I did get a couple of sort of complimentary tickets for some of the more expensive leagues, like England, for instance, when I went to go and watch Bournemouth play. It would have been difficult to get in otherwise, actually, because it's all season ticket holders. But the most expensive I paid was about £55 to get into Porto. But that was for a ticket on the halfway line. And they've got quite an interesting structure where the members, Porto members, pay a different rate than, say, a football tourist like me. I think it's quite fair. So if you're a member, you'll pay, I don't know, say £5 to sit behind the goal. But if you happen to be in the same area and you're a non-member, you'll pay a greater amount, with maybe £10. So that's why I ended up paying so much, because I was in probably the best seats in the house, and I had to pay that extra bit for being a non-member. But there weren't too many games that were over about £30, which is probably sort of your standard championship ticket price these days, I would say.
Yeah. No, it's I think there's I won't mention the figure, but I think you mentioned the figure in the book of like how much all of the tickets cost you for your travels, and my jaw just hit the floor.
Yeah, it wasn't very much, was it?
No, it wasn't. I was very surprised.
I was surprised as well. I mean, I did get a few complimentaries, but I did have a budget. I obviously had to budget in advance how much I thought I was going to spend on each thing, and tickets was one where I actually made a bit of a saving, because I spent less than I'd budgeted for per game, even though I went to more games than I was expecting to go to.
Yeah. And what about I mean, your other aspects that you had to budget for? I guess travel and accommodation being like the major two. How did you go over? Did you go under?
Yeah, I think I was within a couple of percent at the end of my
Wow,
overall. I
that's
mean, I am
some
an
that's some
analyst,
good
so
statistic. Yeah, yeah.
I think I could have got dead on, but I got a little bit lax in my last few weeks and spent more money than I perhaps needed to because I knew I wasn't going to go horrendously over budget. Um, yeah, I think flights I was remarkably close on the budget actually.
Hmm.
It was yeah, I was able to get some really bargain fares. I mean, if you travel low season, even short notice, you can get some ridiculous fares. Like I think the cheapest I paid was £9 for a flight from Luxembourg to Stansted.
Maybe cheaper at the
And
moment.
well, yeah, they possibly are, but yeah, you might have a few restrictions. But so yeah, I think I did quite well on the flights. I got stung a few times on internal travel, particularly train tickets at last minute, because I couldn't book in advance because I didn't know when the game was going to be. So I had to wait till just a few days before when all the cheap tickets had gone.
Hmm.
So that yeah, travel did add up quite a bit. But really, the biggest chunk of my spend was on accommodation. I
Yeah.
mean, I was away for around about 200 nights. So, you know, if
Where was the cheapest accommodation that you came across?
the
For like
cheap,
an actual room rather than like I'm guessing you did some hosteling while you were on your
yeah,
travels.
there was a few hostels in the more expensive countries, but mostly I had my own room. Um, the cheapest. I'm trying to think. I mean, I got some good deals in Eastern Europe. I think places like Slovakia, Hungary. I had a very nice apartment in Hungary, and it was, I think, probably I think I said at the time actually when I was in Hungary, it was the best value for what I got. I got a two-bed apartment with a massive lounge and kitchen, and off Airbnb, and it was less than £20 a night.
Very nice.
Um, so yeah, there were a lot of bargains, but if you're spending 200 200 nights away, even if you're only spending £20 a night, that's already £4,000,
Yeah.
and it was certainly more expensive than £20 a night in quite a few countries.
Hmm. I just had something pop to mind, and it's gone as soon as it came in. Um,
While you're thinking, actually, somebody asked me after reading the book, they would love to do something like this themselves, but they wanted to know what my overall budget was. I've never said what the overall budget is in any comms because I think it kind of it ruins the illusion a little bit. But I did say to them, if you really wanted to cut costs, hosteling in the more expensive countries, and also if you could do something like couch surfing.
yeah. Did you
Potentially
do
with
did you
family.
do any couch surfing on your
I
travels?
did think about it, but it was because sometimes I had to make a decision so quickly. Just the day before I was deciding on where to go somewhere. It was a lot easier just to book somewhere 5 minutes through a hotel reservation website than it was to get in touch with somebody on couch surfing or a similar portal.
Of
And
course.
and also I was kind of I was quite conscious that often my timescales were quite short. I'd arrive in a town at 3 p.m. and I'd have 2 hours to go and meet a fan group and have some food, and then I'd be at the match. And I didn't really have time to wait outside apartment blocks for people to let me in. But potentially, if you did really hammer those sort of websites, I think you could take the overall cost down to a very manageable level.
Hmm. I was going to ask you. So most people follow football, and we kind of have this identity tied to a team, and then we have a narrative that kind of runs through their season. What was it like to have? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you were still keeping tabs on Fulham as you were doing your travels, but what was it like to basically like see almost like random game after random game? What did that do to your sense of football like afterwards?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. before, because you're right, I was keeping track of Fulham, but I felt a bit detached from the season because I was just going to the old game when I was back in London. I think it kind of changed me a little bit when I got back. I think as well. I don't think I'd sort of I was so ardent a Fulham fan when I got back because I was so used to watching lots of different teams. I think it. Yeah, I tended to do quite a bit of research before the games. I didn't just go in blind. I would look at their last 2 or 3 games. I think sometimes when I had a bit of time, I'd even watch some of the YouTube highlights from the games to sort of pick out their, patterns of play and their best players, and whether they were about to, go on a fantastic run or whether they were about to be doomed for relegation. I think that really helped actually when I was meeting people from different clubs because no one knows the position of the club better than the fans. And if you come in saying, I don't really know anything about your team, how you doing, it already puts you on a sort of a backward step when you're trying to get some interesting stories from people. So I think that research was really, really useful. And I always sort of sketched out the previous team lineup on my notepad so that I was able to, make adjustments when the game started.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess you really threw yourself into supporting, for the most part, the home team for that particular 90 minutes. And then obviously you would never see that team play again that season. But I did, through various, sort of football apps, track all of the teams that I watched. And I think on my website you can see the final position of all of the teams and whether they did go on to become champions or whether they were doomed for relegation. So yeah, it was a very different experience, and as you say, very different from other people's normal experience as a football fan.
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite striking. I would have felt like really disorientated by it. Me as an Arsenal fan, like the older I've gotten, the less other football I've watched. So like everything is tied to the story of like my club. If someone says, "Oh, did you see the United game the other day?" Like maybe 10 years ago, I'd have had more. There'd be more likelihood that I would have. But now everything is so like my club centric. Before this call, and you're a Fulham fan, I actually had to double check that Fulham weren't in the Premier League anymore. Like that's how myopic my experience of football has gotten.
We could be on Wednesday, although it's a long shot.
Yeah. Well, they're going to be in the playoffs, right? Even if they don't do
Yeah, we've
automatic.
got a very remote chance of making the top 2 automatically. It requires 3 results to go our way, but
right.
It's going to make Wednesday an interesting day, at least until West Brom are a couple of goals up against QPR.
Well, good luck. Good luck. I'm just trying to think. I've got so many questions based on it, and obviously I lose my place from time to time. What was the writing process like afterwards? Because obviously you made your notes on the road, and then you basically, am I right in thinking you wrote kind of a sample chapter or 2 during your trip, and then afterwards you wrote the rest of the thing?
Yeah, that's right. So to get the book deal, I had to write 3 sample chapters. I actually chose Norway, Faroe Islands and Iceland, which were countries 4, 3 and 2 respectively of the 55. So those were pretty much done. And although I made a few tweaks, they didn't change too much from the proposal I put to publishers and what ended up in the final book. So that's 3 done, just 52 to go.
Yeah.
I think I did write a few articles for my website, and sometimes I tried to capture a couple of paragraphs about something that happened, whether it was on a train or something that happened in a pub or walking around a town centre. So I did have some text that I could use for various bits of chapters, but it was quite a daunting prospect when I had to sit down with 52 chapters to complete. I guess what I tried to do was, I tried to go through them in a chronological order. So I would start, with countries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, write a bit, get so far, and then I'll go on to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then, to start with, it would take several weeks to go through all of those, just to draft draft them out, try and work out what you're going to include in each chapter, and then over the following weeks I would try and smooth the chapters one by one. But sometimes I remember with Spain, I had a real problem with Spain, and I just had a bit of a mental block, so I just left Spain and went on and tried to refine a few other chapters, and then came back to Spain a little bit later. So I think the fact that chronologically the book is quite sort of it follows my countries from 1 to 55 in order, so it's very easy to relate to, and that means that although there are some parallels and overlaps between the chapters, you could quite easily write them in isolation.
Yeah.
And then the thing that really knits it together, you agree, but I really like them. It's kind of the breather chapters that are chapters which talk a bit more broadly about the trip. Mediums, how I plan the trip, some of my travels independent. They were probably because they were sort of, I don't know, collating my experiences from the whole trip. They were some of the most fun things to write, actually.
Yeah. I think that came through. So how long did the thing take you from like kind of start to finish? I know you've done a little chunk of it.
I guess I started it properly in May of 2018, and the fourth and final draft was finished kind of sort of February, March last year. But I wasn't writing on for all of that time. Sometimes I would be waiting for comments to come back from the publishers, for instance. So I reckon it's probably 6 months worth of writing. But it wasn't like writing, as I'm sure 9 to 5. You kind of sometimes you have a 10, 12-hour stint, and then other times you just simply need a break and don't do anything for a day.
Yeah, probably a good time to give a shout out to our editor, both our editors, Richard Arcus. You enjoy working with him?
Yeah,
I mean, you can't really say no the way that I framed the question, but
no, I mean, when you mentioned that you had the same editor, it did it immediately makes me warm to any project where it's been edited by Rich. I should check out a few of his other books actually, because I might see a few parallels in the way he works. No, I mean he was a really good editor. He was a perfect fit for my book and I presume for your book as well, because of his knowledge of football. Yeah. He's also an Arsenal fan, as I'm sure you're aware. And
do you know what? I don't know if he's ever said that to me.
Really?
I don't know that he has. Oh, that's interesting.
If you compare the number of Arsenal references in my book to the number of Spurs references, you'll notice there's a lot more. And I only realised this very late on in the process, just before it was about to get published. And I said to Rich, "You realise there's virtually no Spurs references in this book." I think he gave me a knowing smile. It might just, of course, been a coincidence. No, he was great throughout the whole process. He really knew how this was going to work for a reader, how to keep the chapters fresh and as unique as possible. And sometimes something would happen in a country which meant that it was never going to happen elsewhere. For instance, in Israel, where I was featured in a film about lower level Israeli football, clearly that was not going to happen anywhere else, and it's a sort of standalone chapter. But there were quite a few countries where I met a few fan groups, and I got sort of similar sort of stories about how, for instance, Real Madrid were taking fans away from the local clubs in Eastern Europe when everyone was staying at home watching TV. And then it was a case of really trying to balance the chapters, and that's where Rich provided a lot of advice on what to include and what not to include.
Yeah, the Israel chapter where you ended up being involved in this film, there's a photograph of it in the book, right?
That's right, yeah.
Of the game out in the desert.
Yeah, incredible place.
It looked remarkable.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I mean, I'm a big fan of different geographies, deserts, mountains, oceans, and being out there watching a football match was just fantastic. And I loved it even more that it was pushing 20 degrees Celsius in January.
Yeah, I bet you did. What were some of the other amazing scenes that you saw on your travels? Like in the stadiums, because some of the stadiums were in places that you would never ever come across in the UK.
I'd love going to the offbeat places. Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly offbeat, and they weren't far away from winning the Turkish title, but Trabzonspor is an amazing place to go and watch football. It doesn't really get any tourism whatsoever compared to Istanbul. And that, from a fan perspective, was incredible. The noise behind the ground, behind the goal, and it sort of ticked all the boxes with regards to fan atmosphere. And then going to following sort of really strange stadiums, going to see Puskás Akademia play in Hungary, another of the great stadiums, which is about 45 minutes outside of Budapest, but in the middle of nowhere, a place called Felsud. And surrounded by kind of farms, and there's this incredible wooden designed stadium in the middle of nowhere. I think part of the appeal was going to see matches in obscure places. I mean, would I ever go to Beersheva in Israel or to Crotone in Italy if it wasn't for football? Of course, probably not. I mean, Crotone's got a fishing industry, Beersheva's got a very good university, but unless you're kind of into either of those things, you're unlikely to go there unless it's for football. And I think you find the people sometimes really open in those places because they just don't simply see anybody otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Have you been back to any of the places since?
Well, I've been to some of the countries, but not to the same clubs. So I filled in a couple of.
Sorry.
I filled in a couple of kind of, having gone to a lot of small to medium-sized clubs. I went to see Borussia Dortmund play in Germany and got a ticket for the Yellow Wall, actually through one of my contacts I made in Denmark when I was watching football there. So, my network of football contacts helped me get a ticket for the Yellow Wall for cost price, which I think is £14. Anyhow, very cheap. And that was an incredible experience, a real sort of, tick box really for any football fan. And I went to the Belgrade derby. Belgrade was one of the sort of main cities in Europe I hadn't visited. So I managed to go there in February last year as well.
Is there anywhere that you would go back to first? I know that's like asking you to, I don't know, name your favourite child or something like that.
Go back to first. I don't know really.
That's all right. You don't have to.
I mean, I think I like the scene in the Baltics. I mean, the football's not great, but it's just nice and relaxed. And most of the grounds you can have a beer watching the game. So I kind of enjoyed football in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So. Yeah, I don't think you'd ever go for the quality of the football, but yeah, they're quite pleasant places to visit, the Baltic nations, and their summer leagues as well. So you can take them in on your summer holiday.
I have to quickly mention that you've put some extra heat on me. So my dad's from Kosovo, and I haven't been since I was like 3. And
oh really?
Yeah. I haven't been since I was 3, and I don't speak the language, and it would be a bit of a cultural nightmare me going back there not speaking the language. You call yourself a Kosovan, but you went to watch a game there, so I had to check up with my dad. My dad actually played kind of semi-professionally across a couple of countries in Europe. Yeah, so he actually played for. There's a club in Kosovo called Ferenikli, which they're a top division team now. So I had to check that you didn't watch them play. He was one of the founding players. He put the goals up and drew the lines on the first pitch. And his brother played there as well for a little while. So yeah, now I'm going to get heat like, oh, why don't you go back home? Why don't you go to watch the game? Yeah, when I tell him about your mission there, he's going to be in my ear a little bit. So kind of thank you. So as you know, I know you haven't got too long, so I'll start to wrap this up. So obviously you've wrote a kind of football travel book, and I've got a book coming out in a few days that's a football novel.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Thank you. pure fiction. Obviously, football novels aren't particularly common, but I did want to ask you, what is your favourite football? Not, I'll widen it a little bit. Sports fiction, whether that's kind of film or a book or
sports fiction.
Sports fiction, yeah. I mean, it could be a Rocky film. It could be. I mean, it's broad when you look at it on the film basis, but in terms of books,
Yeah,
there's
I'm
not a
definitely more of
great
a
deal.
book reader than a film than a film viewer.
Okay.
I'm trying to think.
Have I stumped you? I know it's a tricky
Yeah,
question. It's trickier than
it's quite tricky. If you'd said non-fiction,
yeah.
I think I mean there's quite a few quite a few options there.
Well, if you're really struggling with fiction, which I'm not surprised at, feel free to throw me your best sports non-fiction book.
Well, from a football travel perspective, I really enjoyed Tim Parks' Season with Verona, which is a bit of a classic of the genre. It's now about, oh gosh, it must be over 20 years old now.
Right.
But it's a real. I think it would have made a good film actually. Obviously, it would be a non-fiction film, but yeah, it's a real mix of Italian culture with a bit of football thrown in as an Englishman working in Verona, follows his home team throughout the Serie A season, and that's when Serie A was the best league in the world. I think that's a bit of a classic, really. Wasn't ever made into a film. So if I had to pick a film, I did recently watch it actually during lockdown. The film about American Samoa, the worst team in world football.
I've heard of this. Yeah.
Which I think was called 31-0 with a tagline. Yeah, 31-0. James Montague wrote a book about it as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it was that was really quite something, and that was quite emotional as well. Seeing, without giving too much away, seeing a team improve from losing a game 31-0.
There's not really much worse you can get, but it's nice to hear that
there isn't any worse. There's only one way to go, isn't there? When you lose a game 31-0, you've only got one way to go. But no, football fiction is not something I really read very much of.
Yeah, sports fiction, football fiction, very very small.
Yeah, very small. But I look forward to reading your book, Arton.
Thank you. We'll do your excellent book. If you like travel, if you like sport. What was that? Sorry, Matt.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, Arton.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, if you like travel and like sport, Europe United is well worth checking out. What are your socials and stuff, Matt? Website.
So yeah,
Insta.
55 Football Nations on Instagram, and the website's the same, www.55footballnations.com. That's 55 with the letter. Well, numbers. There you go. 55
numbers. Just like the shirt.
Yeah, feel free to follow the books. Available at the moment, hardback and ebook, and the paperback's coming out May next year to coincide with the Euros.
Okay, I'll make sure that I put some links to your stuff in the bit below, videos and podcasts and whatever this goes out in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just to also mention as well, I'm doing a competition, a kind of a pre-book launch competition, a bundle of 10 football books, including Matt's book and including my book, which isn't out just yet. Again, I'll put the link underneath where you can enter the competition. Literally just sign up to my email list and you're entered for the competition, and someone will win 10 excellent football books. So yeah, we'll wrap up this first episode of Over the Lines here. Thank you, Matt.